She was high on Austria's tallest mountain when her partner left her behind. Hours later, she was dead. Her name was Kerstin Gurtner, and she had been climbing the Grossglockner with her partner, Thomas Plumberger, an experienced mountaineer. The climb took far longer than planned. Conditions deteriorated. Kerstin was exhausted, and the pair were still high on the mountain, as darkness and extreme cold set in. Eventually, she could no longer continue, and Thomas left her, alone. He descended to get help while Kerstin remained exposed on the mountain. By the time rescuers reached her, she had died from hypothermia. The case eventually reached an Austrian courtroom. Prosecutors did not claim Thomas had deliberately killed her. Instead, the case focused on the decisions that had brought them into such a dangerous situation. The planning of the climb, their equipment, Kerstin's more limited winter climbing experience, and his decision-making as conditions became increasingly dangerous. In February of 2026, he was convicted of grossly negligent homicide. The court gave him a 5-month suspended sentence and a fine. But during the trial, another woman appeared. She was Thomas's former partner, and she told the court that something disturbingly similar had happened to her. Years earlier, during another mountain trip, she said Thomas had also gone ahead and left her behind. She survived. Kerstin didn't. The case attracted international attention. But at almost the same time, something strange was happening online. Women began posting their own stories. A boyfriend who walked faster and faster until he disappeared down the trail. A partner who left after an argument. Someone stranded miles from the trailhead, trying to find the way back alone. Not every story was life-threatening, and many social media accounts could not be independently verified. But there were enough remarkably similar stories for one phrase to spread across the internet. Alpine Divorce. It sounds almost funny. It isn't, because an Alpine divorce doesn't necessarily mean someone actually files for divorce. It describes something much simpler and potentially much more dangerous. Two people enter the wilderness together, and only one of them decides they're still a team. It might have ended as one tragic story from the Austrian Alps. But then a video appeared on TikTok. A young woman was walking alone through rocky mountain terrain. She was crying. The text on the video explained what had happened. She had gone hiking with a man, and he had left her alone on the trail. According to her later explanation, he wanted to reach the top before other hikers. He suggested that they run. Then he ran ahead, faster and faster, until they became separated. The video exploded. Millions of people watched it. But what made it disturbing wasn't only what happened in the video. It was the comments. Women began writing, "This happened to me too." One woman said her boyfriend abandoned her during a hike, forcing her to ask another hiker for help finding the way back. Another said she was left alone on a mountain years earlier. She eventually met two women who heard what had happened and refused to let her walk down alone. Other stories described partners disappearing ahead on unfamiliar trails, continuing despite requests to slow down, or leaving after an argument. The details were different, but the patterns sounded strangely familiar. One person knows the route, the other doesn't. One is faster or more experienced. The slower person asks them to wait, and instead of slowing down, they disappear. Not every story posted online can be verified, and leaving a partner behind on a trail does not automatically mean someone intended to hurt them. Sometimes couples simply have different fitness levels. Sometimes people argue. Sometimes hikers make terrible decisions without realizing how dangerous those decisions can become. But in the wilderness, a relationship argument can suddenly become something else. There may be no taxi home, no street lights, no one around to ask for directions. Your phone may have little or no signal. And the person disappearing around the next corner may be the person carrying the map, knowing the route, or understanding how to get back. That's why these stories struck such a nerve. They weren't really about walking too slowly. They were about what happens when someone you trust decides that your safety is no longer their problem. And then another story went viral. 25-year-old hiker Ayla Taylor was deep in the Canadian backcountry when her relationship ended. Her boyfriend didn't simply wait until they returned home. He broke up with her by text while they were still on the trip. She eventually made it back safely and later described the experience as something she had reclaimed rather than something that defined her. But by then, the phrase was everywhere. Alpine Divorce. It sounded like a new piece of internet slang, something TikTok had invented in 2026, except it hadn't, because more than 130 years earlier, someone had already written a story with exactly the same name, An Alpine Divorce, and that version was much darker. But here's the strange part. Alpine Divorce isn't actually a new phrase. Long before TikTok, smartphones, or viral hiking stories, those exact words appeared as the title of a short story. It was published in October of 1893 in the English Illustrated magazine and written by Scottish-Canadian author Robert Barr. The story was called An Alpine Divorce, and its plot makes the modern trend seem almost harmless. John Boardman and his wife are trapped in a miserable marriage. They don't simply dislike each other, they hate each other. But under the divorce laws of the time, mutual hatred isn't enough to easily end their marriage. So John begins thinking about another solution. He plans a trip to Switzerland. He knows the mountains well, including an isolated viewpoint near a hotel, a place surrounded by dramatic peaks, glaciers, and dangerous drops. And he has a plan. He will take his wife there, push her over the edge, and make her death look like an accident. The perfect Alpine divorce. The couple travels to Switzerland and eventually walks toward the isolated viewpoint. John believes his wife has no idea what he's planning, but when they reach the edge, something changes. She tells him she knows. Not only that, she has already told people back in England that she believes her husband intends to murder her in Switzerland. She has warned people at the hotel, and two men are following them. John's plan is finished. If anything happens to her now, everyone will suspect him. But then she reveals something he never expected. She hates him enough to destroy him anyway. Before John can stop her, she throws herself over the edge. Seconds later, the two men arrive and find John standing there, alone. His wife is dead. She had already told people that he planned to kill her. There are witnesses who followed them because of her warning. And John realizes that if he tells them what actually happened, no one is going to believe him. That's how Robert Barr's An Alpine Divorce ends. And remember, this was written in 1893, more than 130 years before women began using the same phrase online to describe partners abandoning them on hiking trails. Of course, Barr's story is fiction. The modern stories are something very different, and many of the viral accounts are personal claims that cannot be independently verified. But the similarity is almost unsettling. A relationship is already failing. Two people go somewhere isolated. One person has greater control over what happens next. And suddenly the mountains become part of the breakup. Except in real life, there is another problem. You don't need someone to deliberately try to kill you for leaving you behind in the mountains to become dangerous. Sometimes, walking away is enough, and that's what makes Alpine Divorce more than just a funny name for a bad date. On an ordinary street, if your partner gets angry and walks away, you can probably get home without them. On a mountain, the same decision can have consequences neither person expected. Weather changes quickly, daylight disappears, temperatures fall. A trail that looked obvious on the way up can become difficult to follow on the way back. And exhaustion changes everything. The person who was only a few minutes behind can suddenly be completely alone. That doesn't mean every hiker who walks ahead is abusive. It doesn't mean every argument on a trail is an Alpine divorce. And it certainly doesn't mean every viral story online happened exactly as it was described. But there is a simple rule experienced hikers repeatedly emphasize: don't abandon someone who is depending on you to get back safely, especially when one person knows the route better, has more experience, or is carrying essential equipment. Because the wilderness doesn't care why you separated. It doesn't care who started the argument. And it doesn't care whether someone intended to cause harm. Kerstin Gurtner's death showed how serious the consequences can become. The Austrian court did not find that her partner deliberately killed her. The case was about negligence, about decisions made before and during a climb that eventually became deadly. And that's an important distinction. Because the most frightening version of this story doesn't require a villain secretly planning a murder. Sometimes two people simply make increasingly bad decisions, until one of them is left alone in a place where a small mistake can become fatal. Maybe that's why the phrase Alpine Divorce spread so quickly. It's funny enough to become a meme, but underneath the joke is something almost everyone understands. You enter the wilderness with someone because you trust them. You expect that if you're tired, they'll wait. If you're lost, they'll help. If something goes wrong, they'll still be there. And when that assumption suddenly disappears, the relationship may not be the only thing in danger. More than 130 years ago, Robert Barr imagined an Alpine divorce as an elaborate murder plot. Today, the phrase means something different. Sometimes it's a breakup, sometimes it's an argument, sometimes it's simply one person walking too far ahead. Most of those stories end with both people getting home, but not all of them do. So if someone takes you into the mountains, there's one thing more important than how fast they can reach the summit: whether they're willing to come back with you